Welcome back to Beyond Four Walls, Conversations on Affordable Housing. I'm David Dworkin, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference, the nation's oldest and broadest affordable housing coalition. I'm joined today by Dan Nissenbaum, CEO of the Low Income Investment Fund, or LIIF, a renowned national community development financial institution, or CDFI, with a mission to create opportunities for low-income people and communities. LIIF has invested over $3.5 billion in transformative projects nationwide. Under Dan's leadership, LIIF has continued to expand its impact, including a strategic partnership with the National Affordable Housing Trust, bringing its assets under management to an impressive $3 billion and maintaining an A rating from Standard & Poor's. He brings decades of experience in real estate and community development finance with past leadership roles at Goldman Sachs, Chemical Bank, Chase Manhattan Bank, JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch, and HSBC. Welcome, Dan. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here, and my life is flashing past me as you list all those places where I used to be, but no more important than being a proud NHCer, which I think I've been for as long as I can possibly remember.
And a past chair of our board.
And a past chair and a close colleague of our friend and dearly departed Conrad Egan. I think just saw that news. He was really so wonderful as a human being. But at any rate, it's great to be in this office. It's great to be with you, and I'm excited about the conversation.
Well, thank you. And it's an interesting time for CDFIs. That's the understatement of the century, or at least of the last 25 years. I don't think people really appreciate CDFIs in terms of they don't know the value they're providing when they're experiencing it. I think that's part of the problem. It's like a lot of things. Nobody thinks about their insurance except that they have to pay it every month until something terrible happens, and then they either love it or hate it, depending on how that goes. But generally, it's a lifesaver. CDFIs are like that for communities in some ways. Mm-hmm. You know, you are in communities that many other financial institutions aren't, or aren't yet, or in the space that they aren't yet in those communities. And so I understand how important it is, but give me a basic sense of what is a CDFI and what do you do that other institutions don't?
Sure. Goodness, where to begin? But again, I want to appreciate NAHC shining a light on CDFIs. You always have. We're in your membership. And you've recently described NAHC, which I loved, as not the big tent, but the big umbrella, which I really appreciated because I think your constituency has grown and I think NHC has grown. And I think what you're alluding to is that our housing finance system is so vast and so sprawling and kind of arcane in some ways for those who don't know us well. And I think what you brought is kind of your intermediating us to policymakers. We intermediate Wall Street to Main Street. That's what we do as financial institutions. I think at this moment when there's so much going on and potentially not a lot of real understanding about what's happening in communities and how important these supports are, you're helping us a lot. So I really do appreciate that.
I appreciate that. And we were often thought of as the big tent. And when I think about a tent, it's a big stake in the ground. A lot of people fit under it, but it's not very agile and doesn't move very quickly. And an umbrella is just the opposite. Everybody doesn't fit under the umbrella at the same time, but my goal is that everybody gets their turn under the umbrella when they need it most. And we look for the highest common denominator of agreement. Consensus isn't going to get you that. But our aim is what is that highest common denominator of agreement, and how can we use our brand to help realize that, and maintaining, obviously, the independence of our members. So this is certainly an environment, a political environment, where that's tested, but also needed. And one of the things I think CDFIs have been experiencing right now is that a big part of the brand of this administration is disruption. And intentionally so. I mean, that's not pejorative. Some of the most important changes in our history have been driven by disruption, but disruption is a pretty broad brush, and it can have a lot of collateral damage.
Right.
And so CDFIs, I think, are navigating that, trying to avoid being collateral damage.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about why we need CDFIs. What are you all doing that makes it material difference that no one else is going to be able to do.
Totally. And then I'll get back to the existential threat. But let me give you a story, an example of what we're doing that I think others cannot do. And in that way, how we kind of partner with banks. Because to your point earlier, we're not here to replace banks. We're here to partner with banks. But we're obviously in a lot of places and doing a lot of things they cannot. So in the Coachella Valley, California, which of course your association goes
I've heard
to
of that.
one place,
right.
But it is truly a tale of two cities. We have the very rich and we have the very poor, or the lower wage, I should say, those who are service workers and those who are field workers, right? Immigrants, et cetera, and very expensive real estate market. So there's a housing crisis there, like there are in many communities like that. So we actually help put together a coalition involving, as a CDFI, involving a nonprofit, the local cities, there are multiple cities there, municipalities, the county, and developers. And we help create something called the Catalyst Fund. And so we've all put money into a large fund, and it is providing capital and technical assistance and a coordinated set of supports and subsidies to developers. What it's really done is created a one-stop shop. It's created some predictability. And what it's really done is unlocked the bureaucracy. So before this fund started, there were about literally, I think, 35 new units that were created per year. And when we last checked, there were 800 units in the pipeline. So what CDFIs can do, and I'll pull out some of these concrete examples, is to form partnerships, work at a local level, bring in early stage and catalytic financing, and not just that, but technical assistance, and make something like that happen.
So you've got 850 units in the pipeline. You've gone from 35 a year. That's quite a degree of scaling. I would think it's fair to call that exponential. So how many units are actually being utilized now that aren't in the pipeline? And roughly speaking, and what does that look like? If I go to Coachella, and what am I going to stand in front of and say, yeah, but for CDFI, but for LIIF, this would not be here?
Yeah. I think you'll see a pipeline that includes LIHTC buildings. I think you'll see senior housing. I think you'll see some mixed income housing. So it's really sort of like we are partners with the fund, but LIIF is not dictating what the community is needing, but we're there to provide a menu of financing options. So I think you'll see excitement. I think you'll see coordination. I think you'll see developers who are actually moving. And that's the kind of thing. So we work all over the country. We work in places like the Coachella Valley. We work in rural, urban, et cetera, LIIF and others. And I think to your earlier point, people don't always see the value. So a LIHTC investor comes in, just assumes the deal was baked, somebody did some pre-development work, a bank came in. But actually, if it wasn't for CDFIs who were actually doing some of that pre-development work, my average loan, we're $1 billion in size, just LIIF alone. My average loan size is $2 to $3 million, and my loans go from $300,000 to $20 million. So we're the ones stepping up to do those pre-development loans. We will often follow that with an acquisition loan. We may go on and do part of the construction financing, but we don't want to compete with the bank. And then at the end, it goes right to a permanent financing, or we may provide a little bit of a bridge financing until it gets a longer-term permanent fixed-rate mortgage. So we participate in a lot of places in the financing trajectory for these buildings.
But the perm side is not the majority of that business. That's pretty small,
Absolutely.
Actually.
We joke about this. It's not funny. We live in the inefficient frontier. That's why we exist, is because the private market is not addressing these needs and is not catalyzing these developments, in great part because we're addressing the lower segments of the market, low and moderate income. And as you know, and I don't even have to say it, you need subsidies and you need grants and you need subordinate financing.
Otherwise, everybody would be doing it.
Right, exactly. So we're doing the hard work. Takes time, takes some hand-holding, takes some capacity building. And it's affordable and responsible finance, right? And we're doing all that work, but people want us to be efficient and operate without subsidy. That's the current political philosophy. Hey, you guys are big. Isn't Enterprise giant? Isn't LIIF giant? Isn't LIIF strong? Why can't you do this on your own? And the point is, look at what we're trying to do. The basic model requires subsidy. And we are a nonprofit, and we do rely on, we generate income so that we are sustainable. But we rely on some of those grants to help us build the capacity and to help us catalyze some of these developments. So the CDFI fund, as you know, I think is a grand total of $300 million. It's not nothing, but in the scheme of things, it's pretty close to a small amount, negligible.
Yes. A carrying error at the Defense Department.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And that supports an industry that's managing $450 billion in assets, right, entrusted by banks and others. So that to me feels like a very small investment to make for a critical component of the housing finance industry. I mean, we're probably paying farms owned by corporations not to plant crops.
Yes.
I don't know why we can't fund CDFIs to actually create housing, is kind of the way I see it.
Yes. Not a slight against farmers.
Not a slight against farmers.
It's an
very
and,
important.
It doesn't have to be an or.
Exactly. Right.
So one of the areas that you all are involved in, which I find really interesting, I want to learn more about, is AD&C lending, and that's acquisition, development, and construction. And that is the hardest part of a deal by far. It's where, good ideas are discovered to be bad ideas. So there's an enormous amount of risk that can occur there that has to be very carefully underwritten. And that's a space, I think, where CDFIs play that very few other organizations can play, and some shouldn't. Right. So tell me a little bit about what you do in that space, because that's really where, I wouldn't say the rubber meets the road. I think it's where the road gets built.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Look, we de-risk deals. That's how I would summarize this. You're right. We, again, don't want to compete with the banking system. Banks will make construction loans. But there are geographies that they don't want to operate in or can't. Mm-hmm. There are credit boxes which they cannot go beyond because they're regulated, and they have risk management and tolerance and things like that. There's pricing that they won't go below, and there's other types of things. So we go in early. We will provide smaller loans that they're unable to do from a capacity perspective. And by the way, last month, I think it was, a group of banks took us to the Treasury to meet with the Deputy Secretary and to show CDFIs to the Treasury and to the Deputy Secretary and say, these are our partners. We can't reach all the communities we want to reach without them because we're banks. And by the way, we're consolidating and branches are closing and the banking system is changing. And so we're boots on the ground. We can help in these communities where banks don't currently operate, or provide a small loan to get to the big loan with the bank. That's what we do.
And that was a pretty effective meeting because Secretary Besson and the Treasury Department have been really pretty important supporters of CDFIs behind the scenes and sometimes publicly.
We walked out of there thrilled, honestly, that the Deputy Secretary was there, first of all, and that he gave us a good deal of his time. And frankly, although he pointed to opportunity zones as an area of opportunity for CDFIs. Now, how that works technically and with the tax break, gains taxes, I'm not quite sure, but they offered a couple of ideas around that. And look, we all have to figure out how to work with every new administration. We were operating a certain way with the Biden administration. Now we're operating a different way. We have lots of opinions about where we are and the challenges that we face. But look, if we can figure out a way for CDFIs to be an eligible investment in opportunity zones, which heretofore have not had the impact we'd like to see, and finance things other than the kind of housing that we all want to see, well, that's a good thing, and we should figure out how to do that.
Yeah, and I think there's a recognition of that, and certainly, I've talked to Secretary Turner about, in the affordable home ownership space in particular, the timing of the value in the opportunity zones is a big factor. It doesn't line up well with single-family residential. And so we need to think about how we're able to make that work better. And I can see how CDFIs could definitely be a part of that.
Yeah. And partnering with banks and other investors. We do this all day long. So on one hand, we're supplementing and extending their reach and doing the things they can't. But by the way, they're partners. We're helping them accomplish their CRA goals. We're generating a pipeline of construction loans. We're allocating new markets tax credits for them to invest in. And we're doing down payment assistance and soft seconds for banks to generate some home ownership loans, mortgages, et cetera. So we work really well together, I think, in a lot of ways. And banks have done billions and billions and billions, if not trillions, with us over time. And frankly, we can go to CRA at some point. I'm a little nervous about where the conversation is going around CRA, whether there's a slippery slope between some of the administration's perspective on what we're doing and who we're doing it for and where we're doing it. So we need that. That's a fuel. That's our capital.
Yes. So the Community Reinvestment Act, it was passed in 1977, and the last major regulatory reform was in 1995. We've gone through two swings of the pendulum, one under the first Trump administration and one under Biden, and both of those got wiped out by the subsequent administration because, in my view, they pushed too far. And as a result, the pendulum doesn't stop swinging. If you push it farther, it just swings faster.
Right.
And
that's good, yeah.
I actually, mentioned that to both leaders of the initiatives at the time to say, if you want to create something sustainable, you're going to have to figure it out with the other guys. That didn't happen, and we don't have anything sustainable. So we do fall back on the 95 rule,
right,
which everybody's pretty used to. And I think that certainly the conversations I've been having with the administration indicate that there's not a lot of appetite for reopening and redoing that. And if they did, it would take a long time. And we have the 95 rule. The other thing is without Loper-Bright, or post-Loper-Bright, and without, which is a Supreme Court case, that removes something called Chevron deference, which gives regulators a lot of leeway. Modernization of things that have occurred well after 1977 in what is a pretty small and simple statute, we're going to need statute for that. I mean, there isn't really room, if you're not going to give the regulator broad deference to post-interstate banking, post-mobile banking, internet. I mean, if we're going to do real reform and modernization, it's going to have to be the statute. I don't think anybody likes the idea of opening up the statute, but it's where we're at.
Right. I will just simply say it's worked for a long time. We've all figured out how to do it. Banks have embraced it, even though they don't love the compliance parts of it. It's fueling our industry. I get $1 worth of grant from the CDFI fund. I go borrow $4 from a bank and maybe some philanthropy. I go and make, $5 or $6 of loans. It works. We don't want to go backwards. And
Right.
Look, I think I'm actually happy in some ways to go back to the 95 rule because the investment test is there, which had been kind of diluted or blended, if you will, in the new one. So I think that's a little more accountability. I'm a little worried that banks are kind of waiting and watching and maybe just kind of holding in terms of volume. No one's stepping up to do a lot more in this time of uncertainty, which I think is a truism for a lot of things right now.
It certainly is. And I think I'm hopeful that when we get through that initial period of, the velocity of the first 100 days was very different than what we're seeing now.
Right.
And I'm hopeful that once, the administration is well established and has their people where they want them to be, and that there'll be a normalization among those who work with them to say, yeah, now I know what to expect. And we'll see. I mean, it's we're definitely in a very different Trump administration than we were in 2017, 2020. And so we're relearning.
Yeah. So I would say two things. One is, while CRA is great, we have to think about new sources of capital. And we think as a CDFI industry, been around for 50 years, our performance records are better than banks in similar asset classes because we're not regulated, because we're flexible, because we're careful stewards. So we think others should be incented and attracted to us as an investment. LIIF issued a $100 million bond about, 5 years ago that was S&P rated. And for $100 million, we had $1 billion of demand. And not one of them was a CRA investor.
Interesting.
Because we were kind of an ESG-oriented, we checked the SDG boxes with the United Nations. And so all that's important. But we're a great investment. We have a great track record with our banks. And so we rely on CRA capital. We rely on the CDFI fund. We rely on some philanthropy. That's actually a whole other conversation right now. But we're also really interested to find new sources of capital, and that's something I think our industry is very focused on.
So talk to me a little bit about the CDFI fund and how important are they, how essential are they, and the administration has recommended major cuts in the CDFI fund,
Yeah.
but not the first administration to make those recommendations. A lot of support on the Hill, so we'll see what happens. But what's your experience with them, and how do you utilize the fund, and how dependent are you on what they do?
So look, I think there's a scale of CDFIs. There's 1,400 loan funds and others, and there are smaller CDFIs who are much more reliant on some of those regular grants, which they may use for operating. I think the larger CDFIs are less reliant on those grants. We apply for them. We use them because it helps us stretch our lending, whether we're doing fresh foods grocers or whether we're doing capital magnet fund type things, which is not necessarily the fund. But we use those programs to enhance our lending and stretch. Smaller CDFIs use them a little bit more for operating. It's really important for us. Could LIIF survive for some period of time? Sure. But it's a diminishing return over time, and we need those funds to provide credit enhancement. So I would say there's two elements of this. One is, again, it's that critical dollar of net assets that these grants provide. I'm a nonprofit loan fund. I can't attract deposits and I can't raise equity. So I need those net assets in order to borrow those $4 of leverage from a bank in order to go make loans. And if the community wants me to make longer term loans, then my portfolio won't turn as fast and I won't be able to make new loans as fast as I want to. So we do need a little bit of those grants, right, to keep going. I think the other part that's really important and will be affected by the staff cuts, and I will just say, by the way, looking backwards, I think the difference is that there's always been some issue around the amount of subsidy that the fund gets. And again, it's been so hard just to get to $300 million. But it's the staff here that's being cut, and more so than I think before. And that's really going to affect all of us. And I'm talking about certification. All of us CDFIs go through a process of certification. It's good housekeeping, seal of approval. It's really important. And by the way, if we have raised literally, I think, billions and billions and billions of dollars, our investors want to know that we are certified. Our investors want to know that we're remaining eligible, that we are reporting, that we're doing all those important things. And the fund provides that. And so, by the way, they've made new markets permanent. So it's a little bit of a disconnect to support some elements of the program and then reduce the staff and maybe potentially pull out this support, which we all rely on. Our investors, our rating agencies, everybody looks at at certification.
So when we think about your work, there are two big tax credit programs that you utilize, and there's the Capital Magnet Fund, which was designed, it's sourced differently, so it's a stable source of funding. It's based on contribution that's made by the GSEs, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and that money then there's a competition for those funds that the CDFI fund manages, that competition. It is targeted for high capacity developers. The whole point is that it's supposed to go to nonprofit housing developers and CDFIs that have the capacity to really leverage it. And so LIIF is Enterprise, LISC. These are all the kind of organizations that come to mind when we think about the highest capacity players in this market. Tell me about what your experiences with CMF and how you use it and how you would improve it and make it, go further or be easier to use. What should I be thinking about when I think about Capital Magnet Fund?
Yeah, it's a great asset. It's really important. The simple answer is that it allows us to stretch to higher loan to values. And that's an issue. We need that credit enhancement. So I can do an acquisition financing that's 100% loan to value. I could do it at 110% loan to value because Capital Magnet provides us with that credit enhancement, which we can use either in a fund or on an individual deal. And it could be a big or small deal. So by the way, in the District of Columbia, there's a nonprofit called Mi Casa, and it apparently has supported, I think, 35% of the projects here in the city where the tenants have the right to buy the building. There's a tenant ownership model. And they do a great job supporting these groups and doing limited equity co-ops, which to us is asset building and neighborhood revitalization. And we've actually used Capital Magnet in one of those projects to help a project that got into some trouble come out of bankruptcy, get refinanced. but is now permanent rental housing for 36, apartments, 36 families that will also sustain them and keep those units in rent regulation. So we use it on small projects. We use it on big projects. But at a time when costs are going up and the appraisal market is a little uneven, as you know, you will not always see banks come to the fore with enough proceeds to finance the deal.
There's always a gap somewhere.
There's always a gap somewhere, and the Capital Magnet Fund is really crucial to cover that. Is it a little challenging to work with? Sure, because they have some layered requirements about, income levels and other types of things. And our basic request has been to simplify that a little bit and frankly align it with other subsidy programs that we're using, because you can't just do it by itself. As with many of these programs, you need a couple of these different sources. So there's always a great call to just align the requirements for these different subsidy programs, right? Everybody loves to create a new thing.
Yeah. And that simplification of CMF regs, definitely high on our list in our interactions with the Treasury Department. What about new markets tax credits? Tell me about how that works. A lot of people are familiar with the low-income housing tax credit as a way to finance rent-restricted affordable housing. But tell me about new markets. How does that work? How do you utilize that?
Sure. So LIHTC is residential, new markets is non-residential, although some people have used new markets on affordable housing, on homeownership deals. You're financing the company that's producing the housing, not the housing. So it's very creative. But it's really important because the world of, in as much as we're talking about some inefficiency, the world of multifamily housing or homeownership actually has some efficient systems once we can get it to that conventional place there where financing can be brought to bear. Now we're talking about childcare centers, or we're talking about community centers, or we're talking about fresh fruit grocers, businesses that are community-based that have a hard time getting financed through normal channels, right? Was it an SBA loan, a commercial mortgage, et cetera? And that's what New Markets does. It allows us to bring in a source of equity, very much like the LIHTC, except that it's a much more shallow subsidy. So it finances a smaller percentage of the total deal needs. And it's complex, but that's okay. That's what tax credit programs are. So the CDFI fund allocates those credits primarily to CDFIs, although you'll allow for something stuck in my craw, which is that they also allocate it to banks who turn out to be the investors. And that's been, from the CDFI perspective, a point of advocacy to say this is a really important program. We're not sure why a bank needs to do that and earn fees from that or line up their own pipeline for investment. But okay, there's a debate there. But it's allocated primarily to CDFI. So we allocate the credits which a bank or other private investor will invest in. Then we help put the deal together. And I will just simply close by saying here that we make the loan associated with the New Markets tax credit deal, which is a loan because of the tax credit structure that a bank wouldn't make. It's called a leverage loan. It's 7 years, sometimes 8 years. It's unsecured. It's like, this is not something a bank would do. CDFIs do a lot of that work.
Interesting.
So we allocate the credit, we make the loan, and we pull the deal together and bring in a bank if they can do some more accommodating loan to value to help make this work and they want to do a commercial mortgage.
Well, like everything else in finance, sometimes you're working with someone and sometimes you're competing against them.
That's one way to look at it.
Sometimes you're doing both. You never know.
That's okay. That's right. It's all good.
And you've been on all sides of that table.
That's right. So we care a lot about New Markets. We're thrilled that it was permanently extended.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
That was a big deal, really important. And so now I think it's how do we use this as a tool? How can we blend it with other things? How will it get CRA consideration? Other things. We just need to line it up. But we're happy about it.
And a big improvement in LIHTC in the bill. On both sides of the bill. It's not passed yet, but always a good indication when it's on both sides of the House and Senate.
Right.
What are you looking for? How do you see a change coming from this if it gets passed?
LIHTC.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can tell you what we're beginning. So it's great if it gets passed. It's an expansion. We really need so much more resources. If the LIHTC is really one of the few and only federal programs supporting affordable housing in that manner with equity, we need more. we are beginning to see that market soften a little bit now. Now, that is just a cycle issue, because if you're a LIHTC investor, you're looking at the market saying, well, wait a minute, like what's happening with affordable housing? Wait a minute, what's happening with the HUD budget? Because you're investing in those deals. Those deals require home money. They require CDBG money. They require Section 8. They require a lot of things. So what we're beginning to see a little bit is, I wouldn't say withdrawal by any means, but softening of pricing for sure. It just has to do with uncertainty.
Yeah.
But this is so much more uncertainty than there was before. On top of that, maybe not a bad thing, there are just more credits available in the market. There are more types of credits, some of them energy credits, some of them shorter in term, some of them more liquid in nature. So relative to a LIHTC, which is 15 years, something that a bank holds, there's a secondary market for it, but not that deep. And with questions about how much value that would get in a CRA exam, would it still have the same value or not? There's just uncertainty. So we don't need another challenge or another pullback in the financing markets for affordable housing. We just don't need that. LIHTC's been a long time steady source of financing that we've helped catalyze, because we're at the beginning of all these deals. Remember, with the pre-development.
Right.
So sorry, I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it does.
There's a lot there.
So you got a strategic plan. Everybody who's pretty much doing anything right has got a strategic plan in one way or another. We just finished ours. And there are three areas that you focus on: impact-led lending and affordable housing. We talked about that. The third place is a little outside of the box of how I think about CDFIs necessarily, which is early care and education. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the work you've been doing there. How did you get into that? And where's the value proposition there for the community and for a LIIF? Yeah, gosh, there's so much to say. So to start off with, we did a strategic plan about 5 years ago, and then we were teed up to do another strategic plan, and I was like, I don't think so, because strategic planning used to be 3 years, then it became 2 weeks. I mean, literally. And our board said, you know what, why don't we just kind of wait till the end of this, the beginning of the federal budget fiscal year, and see what happens. Then there'll be more certainty, because right now it's hard to plan for anything. Right. So we will go into strategic plan. In the meantime, we're doing some scenario planning. I just think it's a hugely uncertain time. Yeah. Well, these are important pillars. So yeah, but back then, when we did it 5 years ago, we tried to look around and say, well, look, there's a lot of people in the market. There's a lot of people doing things. What does LIIF know really well? And where do we think that there were the areas of deepest disparity that we thought we could do something about? And we centered on those two areas, and affordable housing primarily, and then childcare. Impact-led lending is also about community facilities like charter schools and healthcare centers. By the way, we'd been doing childcare for 25 years plus. It's really interesting. We started with one contract with the city of San Francisco as a welfare to work support for the city. So we got in there, we started to, these are home-based centers, maybe 4, 5, 6 kids, infants and toddlers, but more older kids pre-K. And they're centers that have maybe up to 50 kids or 100 kids. And we got in and we started to do this support on the welfare to work contract. And then we looked at these facilities. Horrible. This is 25 years ago, probably lead paint, rotting carpets, all kinds of things, right? Low quality in the neighborhoods that we were trying to serve. So we brought our facilities expertise to this and started to say to the city, we really need to think about this differently. Time went on, we got deeper in the work, and brain science has accelerated so much that we now know so much more about learning and the prospects for success. And the slightly chilling headline there is that if you don't get to a kid before they're 3, it's a lot harder in life. A lot harder. And so those first few years are critical. Crucial for all the reasons You're nodding your head so you know. So we've actually tacked a little bit to infants and toddlers, and in that case, more to neighborhood-based centers, some of which are rented and some of which are people in their homes running a childcare business. And we've really gone deep on that, David. It's so exciting. This is an invisible workforce. Mostly women, right? Yep. Mostly women of color who are running these centers in neighborhoods.
without a lot of support. We have women who weren't taking salary. We had somebody who dipped into their 401k to cover some expenses. The model is so difficult, right?
Well, and anybody who has children who are below high school age, certainly elementary school and below, or toddlers, or has ever had them and has two working parents, regardless of your income level, knows both how expensive it is and how important it is. And you can imagine if your income is down to minimum wage, that how you make that work is almost incomprehensible.
That's right. And there's not a lot of room for debt. So we actually have funded, and we've done, I think, probably $600 million of funding for childcare. And we've reached thousands of providers, mostly by working with state and local government and passing through grant funding. And again, we were focused on facilities, and now we're really trying to focus on the entrepreneurs, the women who own these, who we want to be seen as small business operators. They're not trained small business operators, but they should be treated like anybody else running a small business. So we actually started a program to provide microcredit loans.
I was just thinking that was my next question. So
right.
Tell me more about that.
Well, again, we're working under these contracts. We've now worked with, I think, 6,000 operators, and we surveyed them. And we said, we're providing you help with the facilities. What do you need? How would you think about capitalization? And there was a great need because you know what? A loan from a microcredit CDFI at, 10, 12% is a lot cheaper than a credit card at 22%.
Oh, yeah, or more.
And so there was a real hunger for that. So we have a pilot program. We're doing $5 million in the state of California. LIIF is not doing microcredit loans, not my DNA, not our credit culture, not our expertise, because these are $5, $10, $20, $5,000, could be up to $100,000 loans. And you know what? The demand is incredible, and the loans are processed within a week. Our partner is Ascendus, which is a wonderful CDFI that does microcredit, and we're working with another group called Working Solutions in San Francisco. It's just an example to say, what else can we do in this sector? This sector is not visible. This sector does not have community development financing programs like charter schools or housing or even grocers. And so we're trying to make an invisible workforce more visible because you said it. You just said it. The other issue is disaster recovery. And what we've also learned is that these are, we think we're first responders. We did PPP loans. We did other things. But something happens and everybody wants people to go back to work. People don't go back to work unless they have childcare. Right. And so these are folks in communities who can provide that support. And so we believe they're providing a resiliency. We're standing up a fund in LA right now after the fires called LA Rises. It's philanthropic, and we're helping childcare operators get back on their feet. We did it in Sonoma after the fires there. So I think actually disaster recovery is actually an interesting area for CDFIs also, because the way I like to think about it is that we're here fighting for crumbs in lots of ways and little programs to get the work done.
Right.
When a disaster happens, what happens? There's a tsunami. If the federal government collaborates, there's a tsunami of money. That's a bad pun. I'll take that back. There's a lot of money that
There's a lot of money.
That comes, but it's really hard to access. It's a little complicated. It takes a long time to get, and they build it back the same way. And so I think there's an opportunity to think differently here, using community-based actors and really, again, trying to get childcare, which has been an overlooked asset to the community, to get it stabilized and support it and to grow it. 50% of this country is a childcare desert. People pay, I think, close to 20% of their income. It varies, obviously. It's more expensive in some places. But the recommendation is that nobody should pay more than 7-8% of their income for childcare. And, it's tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. So we talk about these disasters and what happened in LA, what happened in North Carolina with Helene, the catastrophic weather events. And insurance is a big play in that. I'm sure you deal with that a lot. We have an administration that has some very strongly held views about climate change and green programs, but also a very high both responsibility, whether they like it or not, and certainly awareness among members of Congress, regardless of what party they're in, that catastrophic weather events are happening more frequently and more severely. And we certainly haven't considered traditionally, historically, what that means for a city or a town to be destroyed in a firestorm or a flood at 2,000 feet above sea level from a hurricane. I don't think Asheville was on everybody's list for a hurricane risk, and yet there we were. So how are you seeing that with your work? How are you being impacted by the insurance crisis, and what are some of the things you're thinking about in terms of solutions?
Yeah, look, I would say we're all new to that. I would say in the childcare space, it's hard just in general across all expenses. This one will be very tough for people. We actually had tried to position ourselves for funding under GGRF. We didn't apply, but we were working with applicants so that we could funnel some of this money to these childcare operators, not to mention some of our housing clients. So that didn't work. One strategy that we have been working on, which I think will help, is co-location, which just is so intuitive. And
what does that mean?
Sorry, co-location means an affordable housing building with a childcare center in the ground floor. Who needs another bank, a pharmacy, a dry cleaner, or a pizza place? Well, I do. I live in New York. I need all those things.
Yes, you do.
And not every building needs it. But the real practical reality, you know this, is you wake up, if you're the typical family in one of the communities we're trying to serve, and your childcare is 2 miles that way and your job is 3 miles that way, right? And maybe public transportation doesn't work. So we all know those issues. But just in terms of resiliency, I'm trying to get back to that point. If we can think about aligning some of these developments and co-locating some of these developments, which, by the way, I think affordable housing is ahead of a lot of others in terms of some climate resiliency strategies, we think that can help support some of these critical community assets as well. So we're doing that work. Goldman Sachs actually has funded us to do a program that supports co-location, and we're doing some of that work, and it's really for women operators of childcare centers. Very exciting. New York LIIF. It's LIIF. They probably have other insurance products, but they have actually funded us to do a lot of work in New York City, just in general, on capacity building and innovation in the childcare space. So we're seeing some response around this. I think people really get it, and they understand that we need to be supporting these kinds of activities.
So you've got a lot of investment in California. You've got some in New York. Where else are you in the country? It's feeling pretty blue footprint.
So I would say a couple of things. Even in the state of California, so you're right. And so CDFIs, this is something people can point to. We're everywhere. We're in every state. And I think an analysis has been done by the CDFI Coalition that looks at the amount of fundings over the last X number of years. And predominantly, actually, they are more in red states and districts than blue. That's just interesting.
Interesting.
We have rural, we have tribal, we have urban, we have ex-urban. We're sort of covering the landscape. But if you think about what we do and what we need to do it, we need to be in places where there's an infrastructure to do the work, where the state and or the city will line up with programs that can actually allow us to come in and do the work. And frankly, you're finding that probably more in cities and more in blue states or districts than in other. So that may explain a little bit of the geographic distribution. But LIIF operates in, I think it's 25, probably 30 states. We're concentrated in some areas, but we will participate with other CDFIs. We will allocate new markets tax credits. CDFIs do a lot of work together. So I think as an industry, we're pretty well covered across the country. And, we'd like to do more in more places for sure.
Well, I think when we make that case to members of Congress, to the senators, it is essential that we are very tangible about how we're making a difference in their state, in their congressional district. We really are everywhere. And people need to know that, I don't think there's one of the things I talked to a friend of mine who's in Congress now, Debbie Dingell, about is, people always say, I want to meet with you in Washington. And, when I meet with them in Washington, I have 10 minutes and a vote bell could go off at any time.
Right.
You want to see me? Let's meet at the Ann Arbor Farmers Market. And I'm like, of course. And so getting a meeting with a member of Congress at the community center in one of the buildings that you've helped create, I can't think of a better way to make the case that you could never make in their office.
Yeah. I think it's a great point, and I think it's a truism for the broader population. I'm here today because you're giving me this opportunity, because not many people know about CDFIs outside our bubble. So I think we're a little bit invisible. I think the Hill probably is getting to know us, knows some pockets probably know us well, but not enough. It's not like we have a branding problem. We've been around for 50 years.
Right.
We've done a lot of work. Banks know us well. Institutional investors, S&P knows us. Lots of people know us. We're a solutions provider for foundations. We're a solutions provider for state and local government. They don't know us as well as they should. And we're a solutions provider for the federal government and for banks. So we do a lot of great work, but nobody kind of knows that much about us, right? So that is an issue. So that's why it's hard to fight for $300 million. It shouldn't be that hard.
Right. So this has been great. I love having these conversations. But one of the things that I always ask my guests, because I want them to get to know you a little bit, even if it's a very little bit, but what's the most interesting thing about Dan Nissenbaum that has nothing to do with your work?
So I have two that are associated with my work. They're kind of funny, but one of them is that I attended Grinnell College.
Oh, I know Grinnell.
It's about 1,200 people. It's a postage stamp in the middle of Iowa.
It is in the middle of Iowa.
Yeah. And by the way, Barry Zegas, who we all know, went to Grinnell, was an alum. I got my first job with Barry.
Yeah.
Actually, he's been a longtime mentor and friend.
I've worked for Barry. I think everybody in town has worked for Barry at one time or another.
So A, I graduated with a degree in urban studies. That's just ironic. But B, more notably, when I took my semester abroad, my roommate at the time was Joe Neary, who turns out to be the CEO of another CDFI exactly like mine.
I love it.
Who knew? So
Grinnell really pumps out those community developers and advocates.
It's a big pipeline for the industry.
Yes, which is pretty good for a college that's located next door to a combine dealership.
That's exactly right, by the way.
Oh, I know, because I took my daughter there on a college trip, and when we passed the combine dealership, she looked at me and she said, "I'm not sure I'm up for this one." She ended up going to Brandeis.
That's funny. I have another friend who took their daughter, had a great walk around the campus, walked into town. You know, the avenues are so wide. And while they're walking down the street, David, a tumbleweed blew down the street. And the daughter looked at her and said, take me to the airport. Right. So just quickly, I mean, the other thing I'm often teased about is that I was a leading economic indicator for a time because I worked at Chemical. I quit. I went to Chase. I stayed at Chase for a while. Chemical buys Chase. I left. I went to JP Morgan. After a while, Chase buys JP Morgan. So for a while, I was presaging. I was predicting these things. Nobody was buying stock.
So that's what I was going to ask on these listed banks. Well, how many of them actually were the same job, but a different brand?
I would say the first three, to be generous.
Pretty typical in this industry.
Totally. And one last thing, which I'll throw in, is that I may be the only person in the world who did an informational interview for somebody who within 1 year was my boss. The lesson is
the importance of informational interviews.
Be nice to everybody.
Okay. So I'm still not letting you off the hook. Tell me something that has nothing to do with work.
Oh, gosh. I don't know about that. Let's see. We don't necessarily want to go to religion, but my father was Jewish. My mother was Irish Catholic.
Okay.
My father of the family disowned him. That's a whole other story. But I ultimately ended up singing in an Episcopal church choir for money.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Which I think was probably just my mother's way of wanting to give us voice training or something, or get rid of us on Sundays. I don't really know.
You have to have pretty good pitch to get paid to sing in a church choir.
I haven't explored that too deeply.
All right. Well, good to know. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. It
always is a pleasure. Your offices used to be here on this floor, and always love working with LIIF. It really is a great organization. You do amazing things. And I know it's an incredible honor for you to lead this organization.
It's a thrill. It's challenging, but it's a thrill. And we're, again, just very thankful that you and others are helping us in Washington to shine a light on what we're doing. It's
great
I'm glad
stuff. We have your back for sure.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this edition of Beyond Four Walls. You can visit the National Housing Conference at nhc.org. There you can learn more about affordable housing policies, affordability challenges throughout the nation on our Paycheck to Paycheck database, and explore membership in NHC for you or your organization. We appreciate your interest and look forward to working with you in the future. Until next time, I'm David Dworkin, NHC's President and CEO, wishing you a great day.